All right, Pete. Well, let's start off as we usually do with the inner solar system and the planet Mercury, which, although it's visible this month, it's not very well placed, is it?
No, it's not. It actually had quite a good appearance last month, but as we go into June and it approaches greatest eastern elongation, that actually occurs on the 4th of June, it's not terribly well placed, and we're probably going to lose it probably about mid-month, I guess.
Yes, and of course, whenever these planets are visible in the summer, they are always terribly low down, which doesn't help with Mercury because it's usually low down anyway.
Yeah, we're talking about low down planets, Venus.
We've
So we
been
lose
so,
it this month. Yeah.
Yeah, we've been very, very lucky with Venus. It's we've had a real treat. It's dominated our evening skies. I had some really good seeing some stunning views of Venus, but it has now left our evening skies. It was at inferior conjunction on the 3rd of June, which means it lies directly between the Sun and the Earth,
Yeah.
and it's now moved into our morning skies.
Yeah, and I mean, there is a special event coming up with it. I mean, it comes back into the morning sky really quickly, and actually, it will be quite well placed for the morning sky because, of course, the ecliptic will tilt up as we go into the later part of summer and into autumn. But it'll take a little while for it to get at a reasonable altitude. But there is an interesting event coming up on the 19th of June, and we'll come on to that in a moment. So let's actually wander out a bit further in the solar system first and go and visit our old friend Mars.
Oh, yes. I've been looking forward to this since the end of the last Mars opposition, actually. It's such a wonderful planet to observe. And particularly as I've got a fairly new telescope now, 12-inch telescope, I'm really looking forward to pulling out some of those extra details because Mars this time is going to be fairly high in the sky at opposition
Yeah.
and reasonably well placed. So it's going to be a good view, I think.
Yeah, I mean, on the 1st of June, it's actually shining at magnitude naught. So it's
Which
improved
is
in
quite
brightness
bright.
quite a bit, yeah. And it increases to about, I think it's about minus zero point 0.5 by the end of the month, which is starting to give it that sort of pizzazz that Mars gets when it's getting closer to opposition. Actually, at the end of the month, it'll be what? It's about 11 arc seconds across, so that's actually pretty good, isn't it?
It is. So that's the time now. If you've got, I think even a 6-inch telescope, it's well worth taking a look at Mars if you've got a 6-inch reflector, 4-inch refractor, because you should see some of the major surface details, things like the Syrtis Major, the polar cap. You should be able to pick that out with that kind of telescope. And a little tip. If you're having difficulty in pulling out the contrast, if you put on a red filter or a yellowish filter, that will help boost the contrast visually. So that's a good way of seeing more on the disc.
That's a very good point. I remember my first view of Mars. I think it was through an 8-inch reflecting telescope, and it was pretty disappointing, I have to say, because it's just basically a pinkish glow, and you can't see anything on it at all. And you think, what are they talking about? It's just there's nothing there, and it takes you a while for your eye to actually get in to viewing Mars, to actually
Well,
get on in the right slot, isn't it? I guess.
it's actually, you make a very good point. When I first started observing, Mars was the first target. It was also over the whole run of from about 5 years. It was the last planet that I finally had success with, even though it was the first one I started with, for exactly those reasons you say, because actually the disk size is quite small and pulling out detail, it takes quite a bit of training for your eyes to do that.
Yes, it does.
So,
Yeah.
and the more you practice, the easier that becomes.
Yeah, and I think that's important advice, really, for anybody that hasn't done Mars before. Just be tenacious with it, keep with it, and it will eventually come. You just need to give it time and let your eyes get used to the planet.
And of course, it's a nice one to image. I've seen so many images from the last opposition, some stunning details that people can get now. The high resolution images of the surface are really quite something.
Yeah.
They're sort of as good as Hubble was when it was launched.
Well, yeah, and I think the other thing with Mars is because when it gets to opposition, it's actually going to be brighter than Jupiter, and that makes a huge difference to how you can image it, because you can image it very short exposures, so high frame rates, and that makes a big difference in dealing with the seeing. And also because it's a reddish planet, that helps because the redder part of the spectrum actually isn't quite as badly affected by seeing effects than the bluer part of the spectrum. So it tends to be quite resilient, Mars.
Yes, and for that reason, it's a very, very good target. And I, for one, am very much looking forward to its return
Yeah.
to our evening skies.
Me too.
And moving further out, I guess we come to the king of the planets, Jupiter, who's still low down, but actually a little bit higher up than it was in previous years.
It's pretty poor this year in terms of its altitude, I have to say. You can't sugarcoat it by any means. So that's going. There you are. I've said it. But it's not all lost. You can still see some things on it. You can see the main atmospheric features, and you might get lucky. You might get a really good bit of seeing low down, but it's still it takes the edge off it a bit.
It does. Part of the problem is, of course, is that the average conditions are slightly poorer than when it's higher. So those fleeting moments where you get a crystal clear view, they're longer between those sorts of intervals when it's a slow down.
Yeah.
However, again, if you want to increase your chances of seeing stuff on the disk, a lot of the features on Jupiter, the northern equatorial belt and the southern equatorial belt, those two bands that go around the center of the planet, they're in the redder end of the spectrum. So if you put on a blue filter, that will help bring out those.
Okay. Yeah, that's good advice as well. And of course, you've got the more obvious things you can look for, which are the moons. Of course, the moons are always fairly easy to pick out. So they're quite nice. And you've also got the fact that it's getting closer to Saturn, which of course is the next planet out. And for the naked eye, at least, that's going to put on a bit of a treat as we head towards the end of the year, or the last half of the year.
Yes, it's always nice to have Saturn in the sky. It feels like it's been down south for decades.
Too long. Far too long.
We should remind the Australians that we'd quite like it back now.
I hope they've looked after it.
I'm sure they have. But yes, again, it's one of those things. There's nothing you could do. You just have to make the best of it. Actually, Saturn, again, like Jupiter, a lot of its belts I've got this orangey colour. So that helps with the lower when it's lower down in the sky and the poor altitude.
Okay, well, those two planets are going to converge. And in December, we have the Great Conjunction, as it's called, where they'll be really, really close together. I think the closest they've been since 1623.
Wow.
Which is going to be quite amazing. You'll be able to see them through the eyepiece of a telescope, both with discs at the same time, which is...
I mean, that's going to be one hell of a drawing. I have nothing like that.
No, so that's something to look forward to there. Okay, well, the other two planets, the main planets in the solar system, they're still fairly compromised. You've got Uranus, which is a morning planet, but too entrenched in the dawn twilight for serious viewing, and Neptune, which is there, but it's just not brilliant.
It's the problem is they're lost in the dawn glow, and finding them then is even trickier because they've got the lower surface brightness. So I think we have to write them off for a little while longer.
Well, you say that, actually there is a trick which will help with Neptune, which we'll come on to in a moment when we mention some of the special events. But let's go into those now. So as we head into June and July, these are of course the best months for those elusive atmospheric phenomenon, which are noctilucent clouds. And noctilucent clouds are the highest clouds on planet Earth, and they're very good to try and hunt down throughout the summer months because you've got very short periods of night. So these give you sort of like bookends to each end of the night looking for them.
Yeah, we had some very good displays in Leicester last year, as you recall, Pete.
I do indeed. Yeah, they were incredibly bright. The whole country got really excited by them. And that's actually part of the wonder with Nlcs, because you think, okay, so you're looking at what are essentially clouds, but they're special clouds. There are ice clouds in the mesosphere. And at that height, about 82 kilometres up, they're so high that they catch the sun's light even though the sun is below the horizon for us. So the best time to see them is when the sun is between 6 and 16 degrees below the horizon. So that's about 90 to 120 minutes after sunset, or similar time before sunrise. Now, what's interesting about NLCs is, and I remember when I sort of got involved in observing them, it was always said that they occur really low down, close to the horizon. So in the evening, they're close to the northwestern horizon where the sun is below. And then in the morning, they're close to the northeastern horizon. But actually, observing from Selsey over a number of years on the south coast of England, I've noticed that as the sun is getting close to its point, the end of its visibility period, if you like, in the morning, that the clouds have crept up higher in the sky, and I've seen them go almost overhead and down towards the south. Now, for a long time, I wondered whether they were noctilucent clouds, true noctilucent clouds, but I have observations which show they are.
So they can go quite high in the sky then.
Yes,
really.
they can.
Quite remarkable. Well, shall we go through some more of the opportunities that we have this month, Pete? So one that's caught my eye is the one that's on the 12th.
Okay.
Of June, and it's Mars is going to be visited by a 51% last quarter moon. Now, I like the last quarter moon anyway because it looks quite different to first quarter.
Yes.
And to have the moon paired with Mars actually is a real treat because that just doesn't happen very often.
No, and Mars will be bright, won't it? It'll be, about minus 0.2 at that time, so that should be pretty good. But that actually leads us on to another nice event on the 13th, and that's what I was alluding to just now. That
Yes.
Mars will be really close to Neptune. So if you use binoculars, you should be able to spot. Neptune's about mag plus 7.9, and that's 1.7 degrees to the north of magnitude minus 0.2 Mars. So that's something to look out for.
And a good way of finding Neptune if you've not seen it before.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Okay, so the morning planet Venus, and I alluded to another special event with Venus as well, and that's on the morning of the 19th of June, because Venus will be occulted by a 3% lit waning crescent moon around 0840 BST.
So it'd be a daytime observation, this, which is quite a nice way to observe Venus.
It is. I've seen one of these before. I can remember battling the clouds, actually, and trying to point the telescope in the right direction. The clouds did part just at the right time, but it was a real scramble then to get everything lined up and make sure your focus was right and everything. But it is quite an incredible thing to see, because the moon at 3% lit, that's really quite thin, and in a daylight sky, it's going to be difficult to pull that out. And Venus, of course, will be a slender crescent as well. So you've got two beautiful crescents in the sky. Now, there are more details about this occultation in the magazine, but probably the best advice to see it is to try and catch both objects when they rise earlier in darkness and then follow them through to the point of occultation.
I'm really looking forward to seeing this, actually. Do you know, I haven't seen a planetary occultation for many years with the moon.
Right.
The last one was Saturn. You remember the Saturn when Saturn
yes.
was occulted by the moon? That was quite pretty. But I've never seen one of any other planet, so this will be a first for me as well.
Well, I think the thing that stands out with Venus is the fact that it's so bright. It's much brighter than the moon. You think,
yes,
that's a crazy thing to say. The moon's much brighter, but it's not. The surface brightness is what you're looking at. With the moon's quite dim in comparison with Venus. Venus shines out like an intense blob next to the moon. Okay, so what else we got? We got on the 20th, the sun reaches its most northerly point in the sky, which is the instant in time known as the Northern Hemisphere's summer solstice. So after that, the nights start drawing in again.
It takes quite a while for that to become noticeable, though.
It does, yeah. It's just sort of that. It actually occurs at a very specific time. It's 22:43 BST this year, so that's when the sun's below the horizon for us anyway. But we've also got on the 24th of June, we've got the fading comet C 2017 T2 Pan-STARRS, which is close to M106 that evening. So that's a galaxy, about mag plus 8.3, if I remember correctly. So they'll be quite close together. Pan-STARRS has been a good player, actually. It's been in a good position for the UK, and it's been fairly consistent in its brightness. And what tends to happen when you get a comet like that is people begin to stop paying attention to them, which is quite odd. I don't remember that one that got very, very bright a number of years back, 17P Holmes.
Yes, is that the one that really brightened up, Pete, and then looks a bit like a fried egg and then sort of faded down again?
Yeah, that's a good way of describing it. I can remember Patrick getting very excited about that one. He said, it's just damn peculiar. And it just sort of got brighter, and it was like a sort of circle for a bit, like a plate in the
It
sky.
was. It was quite a remarkable sight. I remember following that for quite a while because one of the
Yeah,
things I like to do is magnitude estimates. So it's a good idea to, get a nice. If you want a nice long light curve that's meaningful, you have to follow it for some time before and after it comes to
absolutely
maximum
right.
brightness.
But that's the point I was making. With 17p Holmes, it became a bright comet, which was fairly easy. I think it became naked eye, didn't it? It
It
was.
did, but of course it was so low surface brightness.
That's right, because it was so
It
big,
was,
it was difficult to
yeah,
see.
it was quite hard.
But it was there for such a long period of time. People just got bored with it. And so you
Well,
think all this time everybody's moaning about not having a bright comet in the sky, and then when you get one, it just okay, we've seen that, and off we go to the next thing. So appreciate your comets. Okay, let's go out to the stars then. So we've got some beautiful stars around. We've got obviously that bright orange star, the brightest nighttime star in the northern half of the sky. Arcturus is very well presented at this time of year. And you can easily find that by using the handle of the saucepan, or the plough, whatever you want to call it. So if you follow the arc of that handle away from the pan or the blade, eventually it'll point to the beautiful orange Arcturus, the brightest star, Boötes the herdsman.
it is a lovely star. I have a thing for orange stars. I don't really know why, but I do. Orange and red stars I think are beautiful, and Arcturus is a splendid example of its kind.
Yes, it is. Well, as we've also got a very large constellation, which is sort of a spring constellation, which is now edging over towards the west, and that's Virgo. But as we head east from Virgo, we start to head into the summer stars. So you've got the two stars of Libra, which are I just say that because I like saying their names, Zubin el Janubi and Zubin el Shamali. But they sort of form, I always describe this as a 45-degree line in the sky, which is crazy, but it actually makes sense when you see it. You
It doesn't
agree,
make
don't
any
you?
sense. No, I don't, because I've seen you point it out to me, and I don't. I think I'm still blocked by what a 45-degree line looks like. So, but they are a nice pairing and easy to make out. One of the things that is also in this near this part of the sky, of course, is the constellation of Scorpius with the
Yes,
distinctive orange star Antares, which I understand means the rival of Mars.
it does
Although
indeed.
Although actually the colour is quite different to my eyes. Even when Mars is at its brightest, Mars has a sort of more salmon pink hue, whereas Antares is a definite red.
Oh, you're a pedant, I have to say. The the two stars in Libra, actually their names translate as the Northern Claw and the Southern Claw, because Libra actually used to be part of Scorpius.
Ah,
It got annexed off to become Libra, the balance or scales. But it's quite interesting that they still retain that name as they were part of that constellation. I mean, Scorpius is a fantastic constellation. It's just beautiful, but we don't get to
it
see it
is.
properly.
No, it's cut off by the horizon. I have actually, from the south of France, in Nice, that's the first time I saw the whole constellation because it was just above the sea. You could see the whole thing.
Oh, you just get the sting in the tail, those two stars at the end. Yeah, that's fantastic.
It is. Well, one of the things really worth looking out for in Scorpius is the beautiful Goblin Cluster M4, which is very, very close to Antares, and I think probably one of the easiest deep sky objects in the night sky to find.
It would be magnificent for us if it was a bit higher, because it's mag plus 7.5, so it's quite a bright globular, but it's so low down, it's like gets attenuated by the atmosphere
Dust
we've
and
got.
light pollution.
So above Scorpius, of course, we've got Ophiuchus, the Serpent Bearer. Now, I've heard this described in different ways. Some people describe it as an upturned flower pot, but there is actually a rather macabre asterism there, which is called the coffin, because it looks a bit, and it does actually look coffin shaped, I have to say. But it's supposed to represent a serpent bearer, and he's carrying a snake across the sky. And that's represented by the constellation of Serpens, the snake. And Serpens is the only constellation which is split in two. So you've got Serpens cauda, the snake's tail, and then you've got Serpens caput, the snake's head. So the head is to the west, and to the east you've got the tail. It's a bit weird, that, isn't it?
It is a bit weird, but it is quite an interesting constellation. Although Ophiuchus isn't marked out by particularly bright stars. I still think it's quite a distinctive shape in the sky, even though the stars aren't very prominent.
Do you think so?
Yeah, I do actually. It sounds strange, but it is one of the constellations I tend to notice. I think it's because from where my observatory is situated, it dominates the sky just to the southeast. So when it's there, it fills the sky, and I notice it.
Okay. I sort of notice it because there's nothing in it. Am I being unkind? Well, the head of Fucus is marked by the orange supergiant star Razel-Hague, or Razel-Hague, however you want to pronounce that, which is a magnitude +2 star, and sits on top of the constellation where the head would be. But next to that, you've got Razel-Gethe, which is the brightest star in Hercules, the strong man. And unusually, Razel-Gethe sits at the bottom of that constellation, so he's upside down in the sky.
Yeah, which is strange because the torso of the flower pot asterism, keystone asterism, if you like, of Hercules, kind of looks like the torso. And I was quite surprised the first time I saw the picture. I thought, oh no, it's actually it's upside down.
Yeah, the keystone is a faint asterism, isn't it? And it's famous. It's not particularly large, but it's famous because it contains M13, the Great Globular Cluster in Hercules, and that is a beauty. And that lays 2/3 of the way up from the star in the southwest corner of the keystone asterism. So along that line, from that one towards the one in the northwest corner. So 2/3 of the way along that line. And it looks a bit like a fuzzy star. You can see it with the naked eye, actually.
I've only ever seen it once in the naked eye, and that was I think in Ireland in a dark sky site.
Okay.
But I think obviously it'll be easier to see if your skies are less light polluted. You probably can pull it out quite easily.
Yeah, okay. Well, so to the east of Hercules and Fucus, we have the distinctive asterism, one of the largest in the sky, which is the giant summer triangle, which is moving into view. In June, it sort of sits to the east of the meridian point, so it's sort of moving into position. But it's formed by the three principal stars of Lyra and Cygnus and Aquila. So we've got Vega in Lyra, Deneb in Cygnus, and Altair in Aquila the Eagle. So those three stars, very distinctive in the night sky. And of course, the summer Milky Way flows down through the summer triangle. So that's something to look out for when the moon is out of the way.
Yes, and no doubt we can discuss more of the things we can find in the summer triangle and the Milky Way in the next virtual planetarium.
I think that's the best time to do it when you get into June, because the nights are beginning to get darker as we've gone past the solstice, and the position of the Milky Way is probably better placed in July and August. So let's leave that until then. So there's plenty to go out and have a look for in the night sky. I hope we have some good clear weather, and thank you very much, Paul.
Thanks, Pete.